As you all know, we libertarians would love nothing more than to lay to waste the very planet from which we draw our substance. Welcome to episode 143 of the Scottish Liberty Podcast. I was recently asked to appear on the show Free Market's Green Earth to discuss an article by George Monbiot in The Guardian, and this is the result.
Welcome, Antony Sammeroff, to Free Market's Green Earth. I'm your host, Nicky P. Here as always with Ben, the Liberty Hippie. How are we doing today, gentlemen?
Doing well.
Pretty good. It's 3 a.m. in Scotland. I got back to Glasgow not long ago. I was in Edinburgh, as you guys say. We say Edinburgh here. Americans say Edinburgh, because Yaron Brook was speaking, the famous subjectivist, and I interviewed him with Tom Laird, the leader of the Scottish Libertarian Party, for Scottish Liberty Podcast. So that's going to be out this week.
Awesome.
And then I came right back. Well, not really right back because I hung around. But yeah, I'm ready to go. 3 a.m. Sorry if I sound a little bit cloudy up in places. It's to be expected.
I just assumed it was because you were a libertarian.
All right, okay. I'm just bringing the... I'll bring my maximum charm for 3 a.m. It just means that I've got this nice, slow, soothing voice.
I listen to this stuff at 2x anyways, so it's not going to make a difference to me. So Anthony actually sent me this article. I don't know, maybe I feel like it was probably a month ago. I may be making it longer than it is, but it was an article penned by George Monbiot for The Guardian. And this is actually a fairly old article.
I didn't realize that at the time I sent it to you.
Oh, no, but it's interesting because that is one of the angles I want to definitely talk about is, it's almost been a decade since this thing was written. And what do you think has actually changed in the minds of people is one of the things I want to cover later. But I don't really know who George Monbiot is and why I should care about him in that regard.
Yeah. So he's a pretty well-known leftist in the UK. He's been writing for decades, and he is a big deal over here. He writes for The Guardian, which is probably the best known left-leaning paper. It's not a far-left communist paper. It's generally for a mixed economy, but they want cleaned up capitalism, lots of regulation.
So fascism.
They talk a lot about inequality. They talk a lot about these kinds of things. And it's quite a pretentious paper in the sense that it's for people who think of themselves as quite intellectual. It's not written down. It's not written to people with low levels of education. It's written in quite advanced language. Sorry for want of a better word. That's my 3 a.m. brain not being able to think of another way of saying that. But yeah, so he's someone that's worth knowing exists because he is often coming up with he's a good thermometer of what the left tend to think in general. And he has said that he was on quite a prominent British conservative / libertarian podcast, and he was saying on that we should have lower standards of living here in the West so that people in developing countries could have higher standards of living and all sorts of things like that.
Lovely. Sounds lovely.
I mean, I think actually if you left things to the free market, that is probably what would end up happening. But
yeah, probably.
Let's not force it though,
But not for the same reasons. I think in the long term we'd all be better off. But I mean, we would benefit if developing countries had free markets. What happens in rich countries would happen, which is people wouldn't all be doing labor on farms and fairly menial tasks. A lot of them would be getting education, so they'd be able to invent stuff that we'd benefit from. I mean, we benefit from stuff invented in America. You benefit from stuff that invented in other countries. So the more people who are living in an environment where they can become inventors, we all benefit from that innovation.
Yeah. We all listen to the Soho Forum debate. You don't need to drag it out here again.
I don't think I made that particular argument.
Anthony's putting the mushroom stamp on. I got the future planned out, everybody.
Well, I hope that's the future. Sometimes I get a little bit scared about most people's view of free markets and capitalism at the moment.
Yeah, it is pretty odd. But let's get right on into this here article, because this has got a whole lot of meat to it that I just was astounded that anyone could actually write. This is apparently what people think I think, and I can't imagine it being further from the truth. So,
Okay.
why libertarians must deny climate change in one short take. I must applaud Matt Brunig's summing up of the inherent conflict between libertarianism and environmental issues. In a simple and very short tract, Matt Brunig presents a devastating challenge to those who call themselves libertarians and explains why they have no choice but to deny climate change and other environmental problems. Brunig explains what is now the core argument used by conservatives and libertarians' procedural account of property rights. In brief, this means that if the process by which property was acquired was just, those who have acquired it should be free to use it as they wish without social restraints or obligations to other people.
Wow.
Their property rights are absolute and cannot be intruded upon by the state or by anyone else. Any interference with or damage to the value of their property without their consent, even by taxation, is an unwarranted infringement. Like, what do you think, guys? Do you feel like that says what you think?
Well, I would like to at least acknowledge the fact that at least nowadays they acknowledge that we have a theory of property being acquired justly or unjustly, that such a concept even exists in libertarianism. Wow, they got one libertarian concept at least. I thought before they didn't, that they thought we just, loved the rich and wanted them to feast on the bones of the poor, and that all was to play for. Greed is good, whatever way people made a living. We do have a theory of the just and unjust acquiring of property, and that obviously the government shouldn't be giving handouts to big business or passing preferential legislations in favor of them.
Well, I don't know about you, but I go to bed every night praying to my picture of the Waltons on my, by my bedside.
Right. Shall we go over a little bit more of this, this passage again? Sorry.
Well, the thing that really astounds me is it's kind of close. The thing that really stuck out to me when I was reading this was, in particular, the line "without social restraints," and that to me is the thing that really doesn't ring true. Because the fact of the matter is no libertarian would sit there and say, well, I can do with my property what I want, and everyone has to be cool with it.
Yeah, I mean, no one says you can shoot someone in the head on your property just because it's your property. But it's quite interesting because he says, what is now the core argument used by conservatives and libertarians, the procedural justice account of property rights. But that's not true. The core argument used by libertarians, at least, can't speak for conservatives, is the non-aggression principle. That's almost universally the core argument that's used by libertarians. So he's not even got that right.
Well, that kind of depends on who you're talking to, because if you were to talk to, say, Dave Smith, he would sit there and say that the national or the NAP is 100% just property rights. And when you define property rights, that's how you define everything. Who can be if a violation of property rights is the aggression.
Okay, I understand that case. We start with sort of self-ownership. So I think I would have said that saying that kind of muddies the water a bit.
Well, it's a level of abstraction to do it that way.
It's a different level of abstraction. I guess it's the way that you look at it, which part comes first. I would say most people start with, right, there's a non-aggression axiom, don't hit people, don't steal their stuff. And then there's an account based on that of how property is justly acquired. But you're going one step further and saying, we're starting with self-ownership, the right to own your body. So yeah, it really depends what order you put it in or how you frame it.
I guess for us, you and I would take that as a for granted situation. Mm-hmm. And it works out rhetorically nicely for him in this because he gets to skip over that part.
Right.
And if you skip over that, now it's just this abstract thing that isn't grounded in a very specific principle.
So when he says without social restraints or obligations to other people, well, I mean, that is
not even humanly possible?
No, and also he couldn't frame it as the NAP because as soon as he did frame it as the NAP, he'd have to go, well, libertarians don't believe that then because, well, obviously you can't use your property in such a way that violates the NAP, which is why he couldn't have, the core argument is the non-aggression principle.
Well, and hilariously enough, that's actually the crux of what he's about to get to in the rest of this is that, oh, well, everyone's rights infringe upon everybody else's rights. And I don't actually know that there's a libertarian out there that would argue that that's not the case. This just all the non-aggression principle does gives us a framework, a legal framework as to how to deal with that when it happens. And most of the things, like, we'll get into, he gets real creative in his visions of a libertarian world run amok towards the end that I think I'm like, I could think of a whole ton of libertarian ways that would be dealt with, because yes, those things are considered aggression.
Can you respond to this then? Their property rights are absolute and cannot be intruded upon by the state or by anyone else. Any interference with or damage to the value of their property without their consent, even by taxation, is an unwarranted infringement. Anything else to add?
I mean, to me, the way it's written, I don't inherently see a property right with or see an issue with it. I could go along with that. But, unwarranted is a pretty broad way of putting it. Like, what's unwarranted? Like, are you trying to kill me, or did you just step over the line? At which point you can kind of get into like some of Rothbard's, what is a just reaction type situation. I guess technically there's also the property value. Like, the fact of the matter is value is all subjective. And if you put a house next to mine that lowers my property value, I really can't say anything about that. I could try and rally the other people in the neighborhood to force you out, but that's... Someone
can put a skyscraper in your window that ruins your view. It might just be tough titties.
Yeah.
I think, property rights are absolute. Anytime you make absolute, it's just like, forget it. It's off. There's something in there that's not going to fit. And like, I could see an instance at some point in time where, you have property and you do something with it that, adversely affects your neighbor's property, right? It damages it in some way. And the recompense is part of your property or something, right? If there's no other way that you can pay back somebody for damaging their property, maybe it's part of your property that you were dumping the oil onto and it went into their field or something. I could see ways that I don't know, to me he's trying to make it seem like property isn't necessarily transferable by any other means than something completely voluntary. I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily the case when you get to the courts and whatnot.
Let's keep going on this, because he'll get more explicit in kind of where he's going with things. So this, with local variations, is the basic philosophy of the Republican candidates, the Tea Party movement, the lobby groups that call themselves free market think tanks, and much of the new right in the UK. It is a pitiless, one-sided, mechanical view of the world, which elevates the rights of property over everything else, meaning that those who possess the most property end up with great power over others. Dressed up as freedom, it is a formula for oppression and bondage. It does nothing to address inequality, hardship, or social exclusion, a transparently self-serving vision. It seeks to justify the greedy and selfish behavior of those with wealth and power.
Dun, dun, dun.
I feel like I need to grow a mustache that I can twirl.
Who has he spoken to that espouses this view? Like, as you said, where's the libertarians that worship the Waltons and want to justify oppression and bondage?
It's just a caricature. He's just describing a caricature of like some, evil robber baron from like...
Exactly. Saying it's a pitiless, one-sided, mechanical view of the world, that's just an adjective, okay? That has no philosophical value whatsoever, which elevates the rights of property over everything else.
He did the key thing in the beginning, though, because he starts with something that's an abstraction of the non-aggression principle. He takes that out of our framework. Now, granted, if you start looking at like the Republicans things that have a less principled way of looking at this than, say, we do in a free market world, then perhaps he starts making... But this is very, very specifically lobbed out to accuse libertarians of a specific thing. Yeah. And this is not resembling what a libertarian would be thinking in any respect. The idea is to protect the minority.
Inequality again, right? Okay. Venezuela's more equal than the US is, but do people have higher living standards on average in Venezuela or the US? They're obsessed with inequality in the rich. And yeah, okay, we also have to put in these caveats. Yes, I know a lot of rich people benefit from handouts to the government and stuff like that, and preferential legislations, and they shouldn't. But they don't have a problem with that as much as they do wealth. They're not bothered about whether wealth is justly acquired or not. He's already said that, oh, as long as it's justly acquired, as though that's some kind of trivial point. It's not fucking trivial whether wealth is justly acquired or not.
Well, it has to be not. It has to be not trivial, because if that mattered, then with us who have view that taxation is theft, well, then that means everything they acquire is unjustly acquired, and so they have to have that out. They have to have that okay to take.
But yeah, you're correct. That's a great addition to the point that I was about to make, which is the other side of the coin. Not only does the distinction between just and unjust property mean that they have to reconsider whether taxation is just. The point is, if property is acquired justly, doing so means you've necessarily benefited other people according to their values in acquiring that property. If you've grown a bunch of apples and you sell them, you've mechanized the sale of apples so that you've sold more of them than any of your other competitors because you can provide cheaper apples, and you've sold 100 million of these apples, and you got 1 cent for each one, and because of that you're now a millionaire, a billionaire. You've sold an incredible amount of apples. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter.
Well, amusingly enough, if you follow the perception, what the average person's perception is of what the profit margin of a business is, it's wildly out of sync with what the profit margins of businesses actually are. They've got it in their head they're making 75% profit. Some businesses don't clear 5 to 10 because it's just the competition's too steep for them to do it.
Yeah, for restaurants and cafes, it's 4 to 6 sometimes. So one of the things is, I don't really like to use Jeff Bezos as an example because I know that Amazon has received handouts and unfair treatment and things like that. But just as an example, because it's the most easy to illustrate, yeah, he's super rich. How many books has Amazon sold?
Mm-hmm.
And they sell them for cheaper than those people would have to pay for them otherwise. Every time someone gets a book $2 cheaper on Amazon than they would have otherwise, delivered to their door the next day, right? He's benefited them. Their living standard is higher. So if he's got 1 cent for every book he's sold, that would probably make him super rich. Anyway, I don't know exactly how much he's made per book, but if you divided it by the amount of good that Amazon has done in the world, then it's pretty good. Now, it could be that if Amazon hadn't received all this preferential treatment, then something even better than Amazon would have arisen on a free market. I don't know. However, it illustrates the point that someone can get extraordinarily rich because of the volume of people that they serve through their business. And he acts like the point of wealth being acquired justly is trivial, but it's not trivial.
Yeah, that's part of it, right? It's there's only going to be one Jeff Bezos, one Bill Gates, there's only going to be one. But at the same time, you're right. How many more books can I buy now because I got those last 5 books at $2 cheaper or $3 cheaper, whatever, right?
I don't like this analogy, you guys. You keep talking about books. I've bought way more sex toys than books on Amazon. Okay. So it's just, let's frame it up here.
But has anyone got super rich off selling sex, like Jeff Bezos style rich?
I imagine a lot of people.
I don't know, man. It's this caricature. It's not it's not that bad.
And he says it does nothing to address hardship or social exclusion. How does he expect how does he expect the sale of goods and services to do that? Actually, in some ways it does.
It's not sales, you give it away.
I mean, I guess that people who get jobs from the free market, that takes them out of hardship and sometimes social exclusion because they...
Yeah, but you can't guarantee that, so you got to give them a government job.
But the interesting thing is, we don't reward people in sort of non-profit organizations with the same kinds of salaries, people who are doing benevolent work, that people of the same scale in industry do, because we think if you're helping people directly, you shouldn't get paid as well. So that's a cultural thing, right? I'm not sure that would happen in a free market without a welfare state, because, people would be looking for the best person to make the resources go the furthest. But yeah, this thing, I don't know. I don't know what he expects the economy to do about hardship or social exclusion.
Redistribution. That's always what it comes down to.
Bernie Sanders.
Redistribution. Okay. Because the thing is, people help other people out of hardship and social exclusion. And people are required to be skilled in doing that. You know, like you said, just redistributing the wealth isn't going to help those people for long. In some cases, it might make them worse, like if they've got substance addictions and things like that. Jordan Peterson said he knew people that they were fine as long as they didn't have money. If they had money, they'd go blow it on drugs and alcohol in no time. It's a very blunt tool. So I just don't think the government has the right incentives to do that. Besides, when people invest in factories and machines, when rich people invest in factories and machines, that brings down the price of goods and services. And that does help by making goods and services cheaper. Like, you know, a refrigerator is cheaper than it used to be in real terms, a television, everything you can think of.
Well, he's about to get generous with us, you know.
Okay.
He takes a new tack in the argument. I think you'll agree with me. But for the sake of argument, Brunning says, let us accept it. Let us accept the idea that damage to the value of property without the owner's consent is an unwarranted intrusion upon the owner's freedoms. Thank you so much for granting us that. What this means is that as soon as libertarians encounter environmental issues, they're stuffed.
He dug deep.
That's a very British expression, by the way. It doesn't sound the same in an American accent.
Really?
I was going to say, why are you reading this, Nick?
I'm sorry to ruin it for you. So, climate change, industrial pollution, ozone depletion, damage to the physical beauty of the area surrounding people's homes, and therefore their value. All these, if libertarians did not possess a shocking set of double standards, would be announced by them as infringements on other people's property.
So can I bring something up? So this goes back to Morton J. Horowitz. And do you know what's pretty annoying? That Monbiot clearly hasn't written any libertarians, because Rothbard, for example, addresses this point. So this guy, Morton J. Horowitz, wrote a 2-volume treatise named The Transformation of American Law, in which he demonstrates that up until the latter part of the 19th century, if a factory owner polluted a stream or the air and that caused financial, physical, or psychic harm in his neighborhood, he was liable for damages under the common law. And then individuals or communities had the right to sue for damages. And if the perpetrator was guilty, then he'd be assessed for a penalty. And obviously, economists call that internalizing the external costs of pollution. You could have mentioned that economists have a word called externalities. I mean, sometimes they do. So the traditional common law system, which is the basis of the free market, would do a pretty good job of deterring people from polluting in exactly the way that he says. But it's interesting that these collectivists come at us, because it was a collectivist argument that changed this. Horowitz showed that later the legal system began to change and a more collectivist philosophy came in, where the lawyers and lawmakers were increasingly concerned with what was termed the common good, just like George Monbiot seems to be concerned with the common good, and less about the rights of individuals. So under the individualist view, the law should protect everyone's right to life, liberty, and their property, which includes the right not to have your body or your property damaged by pollution. But the new legal system argued that no individual or group of individuals should stand in the way of economic progress of the entire community. So the collectivists said, oh no, you greedy little individual, you don't want your washing covered in soot from that factory over there. But don't you know that that factory is creating jobs and wealth? And a few victims of pollution shouldn't interfere with the economic development prospects that would benefit the greater good. And yeah, Murray Rothbard said that this thing about having your washing up that would be covered in soot, or that if maybe a train was going through and sparks came off the train line and it set your crops on fire, you'd be able to sue the train line owner or whatever it is. And removing this class action lawsuit thing has held back the development of cleaner technologies.
Part of the goals of this particular podcast is to show people what the EPA does, and what it does is play defense for big business. That's what it's there to do, and that's the best thing it does. And by best, I mean best for them. But there is something that I'm kind of surprised you didn't note in this, and this is something that I find very, very interesting, is how confused that last paragraph is in there, because he slips this in. As you said, it's all very collectivist, but then he slips in people's homes and therefore their value. It's not up to as a libertarian, I don't know that any of us would recommend anything to protect property value, but that's a very personal thing. That's my property. So he's mixing in the idea of a property right in here in a way that it doesn't make sense to do it.
Oh yeah.
To me that's poisoning the well and all this stuff, because I would say all of these things, the particular legal theory that you purport would work, and we would support utilizing that on all of these things. However, someone's property value, I'm not going to support that, because that's not an aggression. Unfortunately, a change in the way that things work around you devalued something you have. It's your property, and unfortunately your property is not valued in the current market.
And that's 100% subjective.
Well, that's my point. That's why we would.
That's it.
But the way that it's stuck into this list of things that I think you could genuinely consider property right infractions and aggressions, it's dishonest in a way that's really flooring to me.
He doesn't get it.
I think that you touched upon a point that's worth expanding on a little bit. You said on your show you demonstrate that the Environmental Protection Agency basically plays defense for big business. Okay, so I think that's worth expanding on a little bit, because when a government agency, say, writes a policy document about a river, that policy document usually concerns who's allowed to exploit that river and what measure, and under what circumstances and things like that. I think what this article misses is so much of the property is in the commons, it belongs to the government and stuff like that. So they have the right to say who's allowed to pollute this much or that much. It's not, the river's not, for example, not privately owned. So some industrialists can buy the rights in order to pollute the river. But that wouldn't necessarily be the case. That almost certainly wouldn't be the case if the river had a particular owner, because they would want to ensure that their river maintained its value or increased its value, B, was being able to be used for its maximum benefit. And
we have an entire episode way back at the beginning of the show that we did on private rivers and the issues with allowing them to be public property.
And finally, if you keep a resource well, it can be used indefinitely, it can be used sustainably. But a badly kept resource cannot be farmed sustainably.
So the owners of coal-burning power stations in the UK have not obtained the consent of everyone who owns a lake or a forest in Sweden to deposit acid rain there. So their emissions in the libertarian worldview should be regarded as a form of trespass on the property of Swedish landowners. I would agree. I absolutely agree. And if we had a legal system that would allow us to seek recompense, then that would be an issue. So back to the article. Nor have they received the consent of the people of this country to allow mercury and other heavy metals to enter our bloodstreams, which means that they are intruding upon our property in the form of our bodies. I also would agree on that. I don't see why I shouldn't have some kind of recompense for that. Nor have they, or airports, oil companies, or car manufacturers obtained the consent of all those it will affect to release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, altering global temperatures and through rising sea levels, droughts, storms, and other impacts, damaging the property of many people. Hilariously, all evidence to climate-related death is down right now. But the basic premise of that is you're right. I absolutely, in a libertarian, do support being able to go after companies that do those things that we can prove have damaged us. So, as Brunig says, almost all uses of land will entail some infringement on some other piece of land that is owned by someone else. So how can that ever be permitted? No story about freedom and property rights can ever justify the pollution of the air or the burning of fuels, because those things affect the freedom and property rights of others. Those actions ultimately cause damage to surrounding property and people without getting any consent from others affected. They are the ethical equivalent for honest libertarians of punching someone in the face or breaking someone else's window.
It's crazy. Do you guys have any comments?
Well, it's hilarious is that the way he looks at that. I don't fundamentally disagree with it. It's just,
But how does he? He's not even bothered to find out what the libertarians have to say on environmentalism. He's not even done his research.
well, my big thing is that his thing is that you have to have. He's living in a world where consent has to be given beforehand to do anything that it goes out into quote unquote public space, I guess is his
Christ,
big thing.
dude, you need like permission to breathe at that point. Like, seriously,
If you can't reasonably be expected to get consent of everyone, then you shouldn't have to get consent of everyone. However, if you do something without consent, you then have to deal with retaliatory measures if those measures should present themselves. And that's the big thing he's taking out of this is, yeah, it could be like punching somebody in the face. And if they sue you, then that's something that you have to deal with.
right.
Because in our world, we don't have recourse, I guess is the big thing. The problem is in a libertarian system, we would have recourse. I would be able to go after a company for pollution.
I think that's a big thing that's missed by people on the outside, if you will, right? That like our paradigm now, there's no real way to go after companies or that pollute your land or take that on, right?
I'd love to see an 8 billion person class action lawsuit against a company for pollution. I'd love to see that.
I'm telling you, you watch that Monsanto stuff. It's that's going to be something interesting to follow.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, I don't want to go on a mad tangent, but they seem to have no notion of how horrendous the Eastern Bloc countries were to the environment. Václav Havel said that Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic had.
Why do we have to go back to the Eastern Bloc countries? Just fucking look at China.
Right. Okay. So yeah, perfect. And then and the ways that capitalism, the system of free markets and profit and loss, actually produce incentives to use resources sustainably. For example, if I'm running a business, when I make a product, I want to use as few resources as possible because that's going to be cheapest.
Well, moreover than that, like our last episode we did specifically was talking about this particular interviewee that Alex Epstein had on. And the interviewer was talking about the ways in which companies will find ways to deal with their waste, ways to sell the waste for some other type of use because it makes more sense to not lose any money. And when you get regulation in there, it actually stops the invention of those types of situations.
Yeah, and Standard Oil famously found hundreds, if not thousands, of new products they could make out of the byproducts of what they were doing. Sorry,
exactly.
You were saying, Ben?
Oh no, I just talked to somebody today that White Oak Farms over here in Georgia, and they're like zero waste, and they all sustainable meat, whatever. They butcher everything by hand, and it's zero waste. Every part of the animal they have found a use for, whether it's going to the store for packaged meat, or it's animal chew toys, or whether it's broken down into compost that's then used and sold. And like that wouldn't exist if you didn't have those
the profit motive, basically.
Yeah.
And then the mechanism of profit and loss means that when a company makes goods that no one wants, it goes bankrupt. So it limits wasteful production of goods that people aren't going to buy, basically.
Well, one of the things that I always think about specifically is that, God, could you imagine if you had a company that was acting not in people's best interests, and then you just had everyone under it say, okay, we're going to stop buying this product until you no longer run the company. If you're making evil decisions with your company, we just won't buy the product. It doesn't take very long for that company to have to be forced to sell to someone who will lead it properly.
And then think of the innovations like, say, an LED light only takes 15 watts compared to a 60-watt incandescent bulb, and that would reduce energy usage. Also, companies will always be looking for ways to reduce their energy uses. I think they've found more and more efficient ways to burn the coal and the oil and the fossil fuels because
it's always incentives.
It's all the smartphone. That's done away with the need for an extra camera, radio, television, sound recorder, GPS. You'd have to buy so many things, a flashlight,
There's a great meme out there because one of the things that people don't ever take into consideration is that there's this idea that, oh, we're just going to keep using stuff and it's all going to disappear. But one of the things that's actually happened is that we've just gotten more efficient with the stuff that we do use. And so everything takes less and less than the generation before it to do the same and more. So
yeah, it would be nice to, when someone does invent a way to go and turn all the plastic in the landfill into oil or something, it just needs to get to the point where someone could do it.
The process already exists. We're just not allowed to talk about it. But moreover than that, so why can't you burn that plastic? They're going to end up burning coal regardless. So why not burn the thing that we already have? And then you're only putting carbon in the air once instead of having more carbon.
I don't know if it's safe or not.
Incinerators burn extremely hot.
Is it any less? Is it burning that any less safe than burning the other hydrocarbons? It's in the end, it's all hydrocarbons.
I don't know enough about it.
I'm not an expert on it, but my point is I'm sure that if you're allowed to, someone would innovate to make it safe.
Oh yeah, as long as you've got the law there that you can't be putting pollutant chemicals that are dangerous for people to breathe into the air.
All right, let me wrap this article up here. We'll finish out like the final discussions on it. So here we have a simple and coherent explanation of why libertarianism is so often associated with climate change denial and the playing down or dismissal of other environmental issues. It would be impossible for the owner of a power station, steel plant, quarry, farm, or any large enterprise to obtain consent for all the trespasses he commits against the other people's property, including their bodies. This is the point at which libertarianism smacks into the wall of gritty reality and crumples like a Coke can. Any honest and thorough application of this philosophy would run counter to its aim, which is to allow the owners of capital to expand their interests without taxation, regulation, or recognition of the rights of other people. Libertarianism becomes self-defeating as soon as it recognizes the existence of environmental issues, so they must be denied.
Wow, yeah, because our only aim is to allow the owners of capital to expand their interests without taxation, regulation, or recognition of the rights of other people.
Personally, I don't think major corporations would even exist like they do now because they require protection to get that big.
See, if this was true, aren't the industry putting billions and billions of pounds into the Libertarian Party? Why are they only donating to Republicans and Democrats? It's ridiculous. Obviously, it's interesting that he says, like, recognition of the rights of other people. Why would it benefit rank and file libertarians to put the interests of rich business owners above their own rights? It's ridiculous because libertarians only ever talk about rights.
But that's how they see us, Anthony. That's just if you've ever listened to a Democrat or a left winger talk about like the way anyone on the right thinks and the way they do things, all they ask is, well, they just vote against their own interests all the time. It's just what they do. They buy into these cults of personality and vote against their own interests. Well, no, they just have their interests are different than yours. Like you see things working out in a way that they don't work out, and so it's so frustrating. Like
he just doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it.
He's not even trying though. He's not even trying to get it.
I know. And like, and so is it honestly like he doesn't get it, or is he just spinning it that way because he knows better? And he
believes in his own press for sure.
Yeah. Which is to allow the owners of capital to expand their interests without taxation, regulation, or recognition of the rights of other people. Like if you know anything about libertarianism, like recognition of the rights of other people, like
that's everything.
What planet are you on, dude? Like where are you? Who? Get out of here. Go away.
But it's because he is extrapolating that because dealing with it, he doesn't see how we would think to deal with it. And because he doesn't see that, he thinks that we just don't want to deal with it. That's the thing here. He thinks we don't care about people because he doesn't know that we have a method to what we would like to see happen. And even if he did, he wouldn't believe it would work. So we're clearly just people that are shilling for the man outside of our own personal interests.
This crumples like a Coke can is quite a funny analogy because one of the things that libertarians always say is that because of capitalism, Coke cans have got thinner and thinner and use less aluminium because they want to save money on aluminium or aluminum, as you guys say.
Oh, come on. I was just about to pick on you about saying it like a Brit.
Yeah. So that's a funny one because the cans have got more environmentally friendly over time. But it's interesting that he really thinks this. Like you said, rights of others is like the central plank of libertarianism. I think if I could say one thing in defense of the left-thinking free marketeers don't care that much about the environment, they are putting hundreds, probably, if not more than that, if not thousands of books out a year on the environment. It's always the environment this, the environment that. And there haven't been that many from free marketeers or pro-capitalists.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
I've started writing one twice, and I've not finished yet, and I've prioritized other projects.
I think you did. I think you made the right decision. As much as I love to talk about the environment, I think handling the automation issue is probably a solid move, like you did with UBI.
Yeah, and that book will come out further down the line if I finish it. I would like to. I've got other projects that I want to do first.
Well, that's why we started doing this, because I was tired of having superior arguments to the left and feeling like I'm getting dunked on all the time.
When I first kind of came into this thing, that was one of my hangups was the environment, environmental issues. And I couldn't understand why more libertarians aren't talking about that issue, right? Why isn't it addressed more? And really, and the more I learn, the more I work through things, the more I figure out, well, when you actually understand the principles behind libertarianism and what it entails, like it answers all those questions about the environment. It's all right there. You just have to look at it and figure it out. And it's not, I don't know. Very curious to watch the redefinition of I don't want to say ethics, but value of what actually holds value and intrinsic value, and extending rights to not just animals, plants, land, all this stuff that actually I don't know.
I just wish they could take us on our own terms.
Well, and I think that's the issue. This entire article is here to do one thing, which is to try and trivialize what our terms are. Its entire point is to make it sound as though property rights are not a way to handle this. We have to be thinking of the human cost. We have to be thinking of the people as opposed to the property. But there's no way to do that without dealing with the fact that human beings and their property all fall underneath this. Because property is the things that you require to actually live.
Well, that's it, right? If you figure out property, then everything else falls after it, right? Like all those other human rights that come, like they all depend on property. Like you want food, that's property. Like all that stuff, and you sort that, and everything will follow.
Now, I'm sure Antony has a slightly different view on how people feel. Is because I don't feel like anybody over in your country seems to be putting much stock in people or what they want on anything resembling an individual basis. Here in America, they at least maybe put a lip service to the issue. But man, there's some horror stories about people over in the UK.
Right. Yeah, no. There's no idea. Like the medical system is just seen as just a religion.
You don't own your property as much as you don't own yourself, I guess.
Well, the thing that annoys me is how can he be saying things like the central plank is to allow the owners of capital to expand their interests. This is our aim. When you have Matt Ridley, probably a couple of years before this article came out, writing The Rational Optimist, and all these. Deirdre McCluskey wrote her books on bourgeois equality about how capitalism enriches the poor. Obviously, since then, Johan Norberg's done Progress. Steven Pinker's did Enlightenment Now. Like, I know he's not a libertarian, but
so you've actually read Enlightenment Now?
I've not read it, but he does talk about government as a good.
The reason I ask about it is because that particular book, I have read it, and it infuriated me because the entire book.
I heard that from a lot of libertarians.
Well, and the thing wasn't that everything he said, for the most part, I agreed with. My issue is that he'd sit there and he'd have an entire chapter that I could hold up and say we're right with, and then he'd make an arbitrary distinction. It's like, I know I just gave you an entire chapter about how capitalism has saved the world and all of humanity, but we still need governments in general to do away with it. Like, he just make these arbitrary decisions because they sounded good, I guess. He would completely uproot his entire argument constantly in the book for the sake of, I guess, appearing moderate, is what it felt like.
Right. No, I think those are his actual views. I don't think he's trying to appear moderate. I think he actually is moderate. He came from the left, and it took him a while to see what the benefits of capitalism were. And that's what he was bringing forth with enlightenment.
But only moderated capitalism. Can't let it run wild.
Yeah, sure. And that's most people's view.
It doesn't matter how much good it's done for the planet, even being hindered.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, libertarians put a lot of emphasis. Even Rand, the one that claimed that she was for selfishness, was big on how capitalism enriched the average man. She was really big on how much progress capitalism meant for everyone, not just the rich.
Yeah, it does. That's what it does, right?
So, but he can't even address that. He can't even go, the libertarians are saying that, capitalism is helping everyone.
As you've mentioned multiple times in here, it's clear he's never met or talked to a libertarian. He has no idea what we actually think. He's condensed it down into a mustache-twirling Bond villain, and that's what he's going to run with. So one of the things that we did mention, this was an older article, it was in The Guardian in 2012. Do you feel like anyone's impression of what libertarians think has changed since this article was penned? Do you feel like the world is more open to us and like what we view on the environment, or we're just still bond twirling villains?
I can't remember what it was like in 2012. What year was 2012?
Yeah, I don't know, man.
It was a decade ago, basically, is what it amounts to. I didn't have a kid. Like, Obama was in office.
I mean, 2012, I was still like blind to everything, head in the sand, just apathetic, knows out of politics and whatever.
I was already a libertarian. I was already a libertarian in 2012, very staunch by that point. I think that was before I moved from Glasgow to Edinburgh. I moved back from Edinburgh to Glasgow since. So I remember I was probably still quite heavily influenced by Stefan Molyneux at the time. I know I went off Stefan Molyneux after about 2013. I just know that there were less libertarians in the world at that time. Now, that doesn't mean that the perception of libertarians has changed much. At least they kind of talk about us a bit more in the media now than they used to, which means usually to attack us, but that means that they actually realize that our ideas have to be reckoned with to some degree, usually to make fun of us.
Hey man, any press is good press. It's not something I've really, I don't know, because I can't remember back then what things were saying, but or things were said rather. But
I mean, I guess that thing, I'm amused that people were talking about libertarians at all, because it does often seem like we're completely ignored most of the time. Being
talked about in 2012 is actually a little bit of an achievement. I didn't know that we had enough notoriety that far back to even be addressed. Although I guess Ron Paul would have been going for his second crack at the whip.
Right on. Well, this has gone on for much longer than I wanted to keep you up this late.
Didn't you want to ask about climate change or something? I mean, we got a whole another hour in this, dude. I mean, like, come on now.
No, we're good. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Antony. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Listening to people try and tear us apart.
Yes, environmentalism will tear us apart again, as the famous Joy Division song once quoted. That's for your other show, Nick.
You'll have to get you back on. Liz hasn't had enough Scottish people in her life lately.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And people at home, if you like the sound of me, if you don't know me yet, you can find more on Scottish Liberty Podcast. But don't forget to make plenty of time for Nick and Ben.
I mean, if they like you more, man, that's a win in your book, right? Yeah. So thanks a lot there.
Appreciate it.
Catch you guys. Bye-bye.
Take it easy.
Later, man.